The medical bay smelled like blood and failure, which was unusual for warlord Princess Kayla Drathmer because she typically arranged for her enemies' medical facilities to smell that way rather than experiencing it personally. Through the persistent ringing in her ears and the concerning wetness spreading across her combat armor, she cataloged her situation with the detached tactical analysis that had earned her the title Terror of Galaxies. 3 plasma wounds, 2 severe, internal bleeding from the impact that had thrown her through a reinforced wall, her security detail dead or incapacitated, her flagship burning in orbit above, shields down, command structure compromised, and standing over her with expressions ranging from satisfaction to vindication were the coalition representatives who'd invited her to these peace negotiations. The Terror of Galaxies, Ambassador Velrus said, his species equivalent of a smile making his face plates shift in ways that suggested pleasure at her imminent death. Not so terrifying when bleeding, are you? Kayla tried to activate her armor's defensive systems and discovered that the electromagnetic pulse they'd used during the ambush had fried the technology she'd relied on. Backup options cycled through her mind. Roll, draw the backup blade sheathed in her boot, take at least 3 of them with her before blood loss claimed her. Die on her feet like a proper Kryn warrior rather than letting these cowards turn her into a trophy kill. She was tensing for the final attack when the lights died. Darkness descended so completely that even Kayla's enhanced Kryn vision couldn't penetrate it. Shouts of confusion erupted from her would-be assassins, followed rapidly by sounds considerably more violent. Weapons fire, explosions, bodies hitting surfaces with terminal velocity, screaming that cut off mid-breath. Emergency lighting flickered on 30 seconds later, bathing the ruins in sickly red illumination. Most of the coalition representatives were dead or unconscious. The few still standing were being efficiently neutralized by someone in nondescript tactical armor moving, with the kind of fluid precision that suggested extensive combat experience and possibly cybernetic enhancements. The figure approached Kayla, who'd managed to prop herself against a wall despite her body's insistence that horizontal was a more appropriate orientation. He crouched beside her, removed his helmet to reveal human features she didn't recognize, and pulled medical supplies from compartments she hadn't noticed in his armor. "Princess Drathmer," he said in accented Kryn that suggested he'd learned the language from recordings rather than native speakers. "We need to move. Can you walk?" Kayla's brain, which had been preparing eloquent final words suitable for a warrior of her reputation, struggled to process this development. "Who are you?" "Someone who'd prefer you didn't die in an ambush by cowards." "Walking. Yes or no?" "We have approximately 2 minutes before reinforcements arrive, and I'd rather not fight our way through an entire security battalion while you're bleeding out." "I can walk," Kayla lied, then proved it by standing through sheer force of will and immediately requiring his support to remain vertical. "I hate you already." "That's fair, most people do initially." He half-carried her through corridors that had become considerably more corpse-filled since she'd last been conscious enough to notice. "My ship is 300 meters from here. If you pass out, I'm carrying you, which will slow us down and probably damage your pride. Try to stay conscious." "My pride is damaged enough by requiring rescue from a human, whose name I don't know." "Lieutenant Commander Ryan Torres, Human Intelligence Services. You can properly hate me once we're not actively being shot at." They made it to his ship, a small, unremarkable vessel that had probably been designed by someone who valued function over aesthetics, and Ryan strapped her into the co-pilot seat with efficiency that suggested he'd extracted wounded personnel before. The ship lifted while Kayla's vision swam with blood loss, and her body sent increasingly insistent signals that consciousness was optional at this point. "Stay with me, Princess," Ryan said, piloting through evasive maneuvers that spoke to either exceptional skill or complete disregard for his own survival. "Possibly both. I need you conscious for another 10 minutes, then you can pass out for as long as your biology requires. Why? Kayla forced the word through lips that had forgotten how to function properly. Why save me? Long story. Ask again when you're not dying. She lost consciousness to the sound of him calmly discussing their escape trajectory with his ship's navigation system, his hands steady on controls, while multiple hostile vessels pursued them through the system. When Kayla woke, hours or days later, her internal chronometer was too damaged to confirm. She was in a medical bay that smelled like antiseptic and determination. Her wounds had been treated with a combination of Kryn and human medical technology that shouldn't have been compatible, but apparently was when assembled by someone with enough skill and desperation. Ryan Torres sat at a monitoring station, reviewing displays that showed her biological status in more detail than was comfortable. He noticed her consciousness change, probably from the monitoring equipment rather than any visible sign, given that Kayla was fairly certain she hadn't moved anything except her eyes. "Welcome back," he said without turning from the displays. "You've been unconscious for 18 hours. Your injuries are healing well given their severity. You should be mobile in another 3 days, combat-ready in 7. Where are we?" Kayla's voice sounded like damaged machinery attempting to function. "Secure facility on an uninhabited moon in the Kepler 442 system. No official registry, minimal traffic, excellent for hiding from people who want you dead." He finally turned to face her, which, for the record, is a lot of people. "I'm aware." She tried to sit up and her body reminded her that healing was a process that didn't respond to commands like subordinates did. "You didn't answer my question. Why save me?" "Because letting the terror of galaxies die in an ambush by political cowards felt wrong." Ryan moved to her bedside and checked her vital signs manually, his hands professional and impersonal. "Also, I've been tracking the conspiracy against you for 3 months. Figured you'd want to know someone was planning to kill you, but my superiors disagreed about interfering in Kryn internal politics. So you're here unofficially." "I'm here committing treason against my own government to save the life of someone my species has every strategic reason to fear." "Yes." Kayla studied him, this human operative who'd casually admitted to career suicide while checking whether her internal organs were functioning correctly. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 35 by human years, with dark hair and eyes that held the kind of analytical focus she recognized from her own command staff. His face showed signs of extensive combat experience, old scars, healed breaks, the particular alertness of someone who'd survived situations where survival wasn't the expected outcome. "Human intelligence services doesn't waste 3 months tracking conspiracies against enemy warlords out of altruism," Kayla said. "You're correct. We were tracking the conspiracy to determine optimal timing for allowing you to be assassinated. The strategic analysis concluded that your death would weaken Kryn military capacity by 30%. He pulled up a holographic display showing casualty projections, political scenarios, and destabilization models that were disturbingly well researched. However, the same analysis also concluded that your death would trigger a succession crisis, resulting in approximately 70 million civilian casualties over 5 years of Kryn civil war. I decided that outcome was worse than keeping you alive. So I'm the lesser evil in your calculation. You're the known variable with established patterns of behavior versus unknown variables who would fight without restraint. Also," he paused and something shifted in his expression. "I read your service record, all of it. You're a conqueror, but you're not a butcher. The difference matters to me, even if it doesn't matter to my superiors." Kayla had no response to that. People didn't generally acknowledge the difference between conquest and genocide when discussing the terror of galaxies. They just saw the systems that fell, and the empires that knelt and assumed brutality was the only tool she employed. "How bad is the situation?" she asked instead. "Your flagship was destroyed, 80% casualties among your command staff. The ambush was coordinated across 3 coalition governments with support from elements within your own military hierarchy. They're publicly announcing your death and moving to fill the power vacuum. Ryan pulled up intelligence feeds showing exactly how enthusiastically her enemies were celebrating. Your allies are scrambling to secure positions. Your enemies are consolidating gains. And the Kryn Empire's leadership is debating whether to launch retaliation or accept that you're dead. How many of my own people betrayed me? 7 high-ranking officers, 12 political advisors, and at least 30 support personnel across various divisions. The conspiracy was extensive and well-funded. Someone wanted you very dead. Kayla absorbed this with the cold fury she'd perfected over 3 decades of military service. Betrayal by enemies was expected. Betrayal by her own command was personal. I'll need their names. Already compiled. I'll transfer the files once you're recovered enough to review tactical data without triggering medical alarms. He adjusted something on the monitoring equipment. For now, you need rest. Your body is healing, but Kryn biology requires significant energy investment for regeneration. Sleep, princess. I'll maintain security. I don't trust you. That's tactically sound. I'm a human intelligence operative who committed treason to save your life for reasons I haven't fully explained. Trust would be foolish. Ryan moved toward the door, then paused. But I will keep you alive regardless of whether you trust me. That's not negotiable. He left before Kayla could formulate a response to that absolute statement of intent. She lay in the medical bay, listening to equipment monitor her healing body, and trying to understand why a human operative would sacrifice his career, possibly his life, to save the terror of galaxies. Strategic calculations and casualty projections didn't explain the conviction in his voice when he'd said her survival wasn't negotiable. That level of commitment required something more personal than professional obligation. Kayla closed her eyes and let medicated sleep claim her, filing the mystery of Ryan Torres under problems to solve once not actively dying. Recovery was frustratingly slow for someone accustomed to commanding fleets and conquering systems. Kayla spent the first 3 days confined to the medical bay, her body healing with Kryn efficiency, but still requiring time she resented spending horizontal and vulnerable. Ryan maintained the facility with military precision, running security protocols, monitoring communication channels, and providing regular status updates without being asked. He also cooked, which Kayla found unnecessarily excessive given that food synthesizers existed and were considerably more efficient. Synthesizers taste like nutritional obligation, Ryan said when she commented on this during day 4, when she was finally mobile enough to leave the medical bay. Real food tastes like someone cared enough to prepare it properly. That's sentimental. That's human. We have these inconvenient emotional attachments to ritual and tradition. He was preparing something that involved actual vegetables rather than synthesized protein blocks. Besides, you need proper nutrition for healing. Synthesizers provide adequate calories but insufficient variety for optimal Kryn metabolism during regeneration. You've studied Kryn biology. I've studied everything about you I could access over 3 years. Your biology, your tactical patterns, your personal habits, your psychological profile. He glanced at her with those analytical eyes. I needed to understand who I was protecting and why it mattered. 3 years is excessive timeline for intelligence gathering. 3 years is how long it took to identify the conspiracy, trace the funding, and determine that your own command structure was compromised. Also to confirm that you were worth saving rather than allowing strategic elimination. Kayla sat at the small table, her body still protesting movement but functional enough for basic tasks. And what did 3 years of surveillance teach you about the terror of galaxies? Ryan served food that actually smelled appealing. Some kind of protein with roasted vegetables and grain that wasn't synthesized. That you write poetry in classical Kryn style when you think no one is monitoring. That you have nightmares about civilian casualties from the Andromeda campaign, even though those deaths were tactically unavoidable. That you refuse to authorize biological weapons during the Cygnus conflict despite pressure from your own military leadership, because some lines shouldn't be crossed. He sat across from her, and Kayla felt uncomfortably exposed despite being fully clothed and armed. That you're desperately alone because everyone in your life either fears you or tries to use you. That you haven't had a genuine conversation with anyone in years, because vulnerability is weakness in Kryn culture, and you can't afford weakness when you're the weapon your empire depends on. Kayla's appetite vanished. You had no right to access that information. I had every intelligence clearance necessary to access it. Whether I had the moral right is a different question. Ryan ate with the same focused efficiency he brought to everything else. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for the invasion of privacy, but I needed to understand who I was saving before I committed treason for you. And what did you conclude? That the terror of galaxies has feelings and therefore deserves to live. I concluded that Princess Kayla Drathmer is considerably more complicated than her reputation suggests, and that losing you would be bad for galactic stability and personally offensive to me. He met her eyes directly. I also conclude someone should tell you that being alone isn't the same as being strong, but I suspect you'd reject that observation as sentimental human nonsense. You suspect correctly. Noted, eat your food, you need the calories. They fell into uncomfortable routine over the next week. Ryan maintained security and monitoring, while Kayla recovered strength and reviewed the intelligence files he'd compiled on her betrayers. The evidence was comprehensive. Communication logs, financial transfers, coordinated movements that proved extensive conspiracy rather than opportunistic assassination attempt. 7 of my senior officers, Kayla said one evening, reviewing the files with cold fury. People I trusted with fleet operations and strategic planning. They were coordinating with coalition governments to eliminate me and destabilize the Kryn military command. The bounty on your head was substantial enough to motivate betrayal. Also, several of them genuinely believed you were obstacle to peace, and that removing you would allow diplomatic resolution to ongoing conflicts. Ryan was monitoring perimeter sensors while they talked. They were wrong. Your removal would trigger civil war, but they believed they were acting for greater good. Traitors always believe they're serving higher purpose. Usually, yes. He turned from the sensors. How are you planning to respond once you're recovered? Systematically eliminate everyone involved in the conspiracy. Publicly execute the primary conspirators as warning to others who might consider betrayal. Reclaim my position and restore order to the command structure that fractured in my absence. Kayla's voice was matter-of-fact, standard protocol for dealing with insurrection. That will work tactically, but might create martyrs politically. Some of the conspirators have significant support among factions that oppose continued military expansion. Then I'll eliminate those factions too. Or you could demonstrate that the terror of galaxies is capable of strategic clemency, as well as strategic brutality. Show that you're leader rather than just weapon. Ryan's tone was carefully neutral. Fear maintains power, but fear alone doesn't build lasting stability. Kayla stared at him. Are you seriously lecturing the terror of galaxies on power dynamics? I'm offering perspective from someone who studied failed empires and successful ones. You asked what I learned from 3 years of surveillance. Part of what I learned is that your empire depends on you, but you've built a system that requires you to be constantly, perfectly terrifying. That's unsustainable long-term. Kryn culture values strength above all else. Showing mercy is showing weakness. Kryn culture also values victory above all else, and victory sometimes requires knowing when to terrorize and when to negotiate. He held her gaze. You're brilliant tactically. I'm suggesting you apply that brilliance to political strategy as well. You're extremely presumptuous for someone who committed treason to save me. I committed treason. Might as well be useful while I'm at it. But despite her irritation, Kayla found herself considering his words. The standard response to betrayal was elimination, swift, brutal, absolute. But Ryan was right that creating martyrs might destabilize the very power structure she was trying to restore. She hated that he was right. "I'll consider alternative approaches," she said finally. "But if I show mercy and it's interpreted as weakness, I'll blame you personally." "Fair. I'll add it to the list of things I've accepted responsibility for." Ryan turned back to his monitoring. "Your recovery is progressing well. Another week and you'll be combat ready. We should discuss extraction strategy. Getting you back to Kryn space safely will require careful planning. Assuming I want to return immediately, rather than taking time to identify who can actually be trusted. Also a valid strategic choice. Though staying hidden much longer will allow the power vacuum to solidify in ways that make reclaiming authority more difficult." They spent the evening discussing tactical options, and Kayla was struck by how easily Ryan kept pace with her strategic thinking. He challenged her assumptions without being dismissive, offered alternatives without being presumptuous, and demonstrated the kind of tactical acumen that would have made him valuable in her command staff if he weren't human and technically an enemy operative. "Why did you really save me?" she asked when the tactical planning session concluded. "You've given me strategic justifications and casualty projections, but those don't explain committing treason." "What's the real reason?" Ryan tors. He was quiet for a long moment, and Kayla watched emotions flicker across his face: calculation, uncertainty, resignation, and finally decision. "Because I've been studying you for 3 years," he said quietly. "Not just your tactics and military records, but who you are when no one is watching. And I came to conclusion that would get me court-martialed if my superiors knew about it. Which is that you're brilliant, terrifying, and absolutely alone in ways that would break most people. That you've built an empire and you have no one you can actually trust. That everyone who approaches you wants something: your tactical genius, your political support, your reputation, and no one just wants you." He met her eyes. "I saved you because leaving you to die felt wrong, but also because you deserved better than assassination by cowards. Someone needed to choose you for who you are rather than what you represent." The words hit with more impact than Kayla expected. No one had ever articulated her isolation so directly, acknowledged it as problem rather than natural consequence of power. "That's sentimental nonsense," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe, but it's honest sentimental nonsense." Ryan stood. "You should rest. Tomorrow we'll begin combat conditioning. You need to regain full capability before we attempt extraction." He left before Kayla could formulate response to his uncomfortable honesty. She sat in the facility's common area, reviewing intelligence files she'd already memorized, and trying to ignore the uncomfortable truth that this human saw her more clearly than anyone in her own command structure ever had. The terror of galaxies had conquered systems and collapsed empires, but she'd never learned how to handle someone who looked past the reputation and chose the person underneath anyway. That was considerably more dangerous than any ambush. The attack came on day 14, when Kayla was finally recovered enough for full combat operations, and Ryan was teaching her human close-quarters combat techniques that incorporated principles Kryn military training hadn't emphasized. "You rely too heavily on strength," he said, demonstrating a joint lock that used leverage rather than force. "Kryn biology gives you natural advantages, but technique matters when facing opponents who might be stronger. I'm generally the strongest opponent in any engagement. Until you're not, adaptability matters." He released the hold. "Try it on me." Kayla attempted the technique, and discovered that human joints moved in slightly different ways than Kryn ones, requiring adjustment. She was concentrating on proper positioning when the facility's perimeter alarms triggered with intensity that suggested multiple hostiles. Ryan moved immediately to the monitoring station, pulling up sensor data that showed 3 ships in orbit. Bounty hunters, professional from the signatures. Someone offered enough money to motivate suicide missions. How did they find us? Unclear. I've been running full electronic countermeasures, and this location shouldn't be in any registry. He was already arming himself with efficiency that suggested extensive practice. Doesn't matter now. We have 6 minutes before they breach the facility. Kayla armed herself. Plasma rifle, backup energy weapons, combat blade that had served her through 3 decades of warfare. Defensive positions or aggressive counter. Defensive. You're recovered but not at full capacity. I'd rather not test your limits against professional killers. Ryan was configuring the facility's defense systems. You take the secondary entrance, I'll handle primary approach. Communication on tactical channel 3. If they overwhelm my position, fall back to the secure chamber and I'll collapse the tunnels. I'm not abandoning you to die while I hide. You're the terror of galaxies. I'm an intelligence operative who committed treason. You're worth considerably more alive than I am. His tone was matter of fact. No arguing, take your position. Kayla wanted to argue anyway. Her pride rebelled against hiding while someone else defended her life again. But tactical reality overrode emotion. She was recovered but not at peak capacity, and defending 2 positions simultaneously was more efficient than trying to hold a single point against professional attackers. She took position at the secondary entrance and waited. The bounty hunters breached with the kind of coordinated efficiency that confirmed professional status. 5 of them, heavily armed, moving through the facility with tactical precision. Ryan engaged the primary group with sustained fire that forced them into defensive positions, using the facility's architecture to create choke points and kill zones. Kayla eliminated 2 hostiles who'd attempted to flank through the secondary entrance, her plasma rifle punching through their armor with Kryn-designed efficiency. The 3rd hostile got close enough for hand-to-hand combat, and she discovered that Ryan's insistence on teaching her human techniques was immediately applicable. The joint lock he demonstrated earlier worked perfectly on an opponent who had strength advantage but insufficient leverage. Through the tactical channel, she heard Ryan's sustained engagement at the primary position. He was holding against 3 attackers, but the sound of weapons fire was intensifying in ways that suggested he was taking fire as well as giving it. Ryan's status, she called over the channel, managing stay in position. His voice was strained but controlled. 2 down, 1 remaining, he's dug in behind, fuck. The explosion that punctuated his sentence made Kayla's blood freeze. She abandoned her position and ran toward the primary entrance, arriving to find Ryan slumped against a wall, blood spreading from a plasma wound that had caught his side below his armor, and the last hostile advancing with weapons raised. Kayla shot the bounty hunter 3 times, once to drop him, twice more because fury demanded thoroughness. Then she was beside Ryan, assessing damage with hands that had steadied through 3 decades of battlefield medicine. I told you to stay in position, he said, his voice tight with pain. I ignored you. She was already applying field treatment, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the adrenaline still flooding her system. The wound is serious but not immediately fatal. Plasma caught your side instead of center mass. Your armor absorbed enough impact to prevent catastrophic organ damage. It still hurts. Pain means you're alive. Stop complaining. She got a medical sealant over the wound and started administering medication. You took a hit protecting me again. Tactically necessary. You're worth more alive than I am. That's not true. It is according to strategic value assessments and casualty projections. He managed to smile despite obvious pain. Also, letting the terror of galaxies die after I already committed treason to save her once seemed wasteful of effort. You're an idiot. I've been told that repeatedly. Must be true. Kayla got him stabilized and moved him to the medical bay, where more comprehensive treatment was available. The wound required surgery that Ryan walked her through despite being the patient. Apparently human military training included enough field medicine that he could direct his own treatment while semi-conscious and definitely in shock. "You should have let me defend both positions," Kayla said while working. "You wouldn't have been injured if you hadn't insisted on being a martyr. You weren't at full capacity. Defending both positions would have been tactically unsound." His voice was getting weaker as medication took effect. "Besides, protecting you is my responsibility. That's non-negotiable." "Why?" The question burst out with more force than Kayla intended. "Why is my survival so important to you that you keep risking your life? Strategic justifications don't explain this level of commitment." Ryan looked at her with eyes that were dilating from medication, but still held focus. "You want the complete truth. I want to understand why a human operative is willing to die for the terror of galaxies. Because I've spent 3 years learning who you are, and that person is worth protecting. Because you deserve someone who chooses